All right, here we go. This will be fun.
Good
It's
to
gonna be
see you,
fun.
man.
Yeah, good to see you
Thank you
too.
for
I'm
having
looking
me.
looking forward to it.
Likewise.
Um, so I didn't do this last time with Andrew, but we're gonna do it this time. We're gonna do a little introduction so people that are listening or watching can find out a little bit more about who you are, what we're gonna be talking about today. So,
Cool.
all right. Ron Mencer is a longtime television and film producer turned entrepreneur who believes business should reflect conviction, not compromise. After more than 30 years in media, he's now focused on building brands rooted in discipline, faith, and family. Ron is a husband, father of two, and is passionate about equipping men to lead boldly at home and in the marketplace.
Wow.
So,
Coming out of your mouth, that sounds cool.
yeah, this is gonna be awesome,
I
man.
like it, man.
Um, let's start with just kind of your upbringing, your background, where you were born, raised, and what your home life was when you were younger.
So, growing up, life moved really fast for me. I had two older sisters, 11 and 12 years old, respectively. And so I was kind of an only child, but I was living in their space as they were going through high school, and I was still, a youth. And then they went off to college, and boom, I was alone at home. And, looking back, you know, during, the dynamics between my parents, we'll get into, but looking back now, I can appreciate all the things that they did, that have turned me into who I am. And, the things that I look back and, I'm not going to do that with my kids. I want to be this for my kids, but it really did move fast for me. I grew up in a town called San Marino, which is known for its wealth, massive wealth. And there's Huntington Drive divides the city in two. Above the drive is, multi-millions, Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, and just sick, sick money. Below the drive, upper middle class, not anything spectacular. And we call it submarino. But when you say San Marino in conversations in LA, people go, "Oh, San Marino, you must be a rich kid," And we were okay. My dad did good, but we weren't, multi millionaires. So I grew up telling people that I, was born in the San Gabriel Valley, adjacent to Pasadena, because we were on the very, low south end, right adjacent to a town called San Gabriel. So I, would default to that. And it's been, I'm 49, and up until about 45, 46, I just use that line. Now I say I'm from San Marino, and it's interesting the takes you get. Some people are, judgmental. Some people are like, "Oh, cool, I know where that is." Um, but my dad, we weren't the white picket fence family. My dad was born overseas. He was born in Budapest, Hungary, and he was raised all over the Middle East, Tehran, Cairo, um, Pakistan. And his dad was a traveling musician in an orchestra, the Continental Orchestra. And they played for all the dignitaries. They played American standards. And so, he grew up in American schools over there, teaching English, playing soccer, but pretty sheltered. So when they came over on the Queen Mary in 1952 and settled in LA. They were sponsored by a long lost uncle. Eventually, my dad and mom got married. She was from Canada. She and her mom had the, her mom had gotten divorced, or her parents were divorced. They came down to LA, started a new life, and my mom met my dad, and they got married real quick.
Hmm.
Um, he was a very pragmatic person. I wouldn't say he was very warm. Not the type of dad to hug you and say "I love you." He was in the army, 101st Airborne. Came out of the army, started a bar with his dad, which was a disaster. The guy who owned it previously was doing everything on credit, so they didn't do their diligence. So the bar was underwater. But a friend of his dad's got him a job at E.F. Hutton. When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. Some people remember that. But it was a brokerage firm, pretty prominent one, and he started as a clerk in the margin department, and he worked his way over 30 years all the way up to senior vice president of the entire West region. Turned down a ton of opportunities to move to New York for us, and I look back and now and I say, wow, thank you, Dad, for doing that, to allow me to grow up without being, bounced from coast to coast. At the time, I didn't understand it. Now I can completely respect it. My mom was Presbyterian growing up. My dad was raised Jewish, and I have Jewish blood in me according to my sister's DNA test. We're Ashkenazi Jew. It's, genetically Jewish, but I was never raised in Judaism. And my dad shucked it the minute he got here. He said, I want nothing to do with it. And religion in our household was, pretty much moot. Weddings and funerals was about the only church I ever attended until 2012. And, that's after meeting my now wife. But I believed there was a God, and I would talk to him at night, but I had no other guidance than that. I had friends that went to, I think it was called CCD, and other Catholic, type adjacent Christian upbringings, but it was never delivered to me, in a digestible way. So kind of void, it was really tough.
Uh, what did your dad do, and what did was he home a lot? Was he out? I mean,
So he retired when I was 10. So I was in fifth grade, and that had been 30 years of, working at Hutton. And that's the brokerage business. It's the stock market day in, day out. Opens at 6, closes at 1. You're watching it, every minute of the day. Very intense. So that was his personality. You know, Financial literacy, I've got it. Like he hammered it in, but he didn't understand a lot of things, I would say authentically American, like sports. So, you know, he put me into they put me into soccer, and he had played soccer overseas. So boom, he wanted to coach really hard and would bring me home after games, get down with a yellow legal pad, and, raise his voice. And it was kind of uncomfortable. So I quit soccer as soon as I could and started moving into sports that he didn't understand. And, I look back and, I'm not going to say I was subject to abuse, but he was very intense. And my mom, on the other hand, is the most loving and sweet person I've ever known. She largely saved me from, going down the wrong path, feeling, unloved, and envying the relationships my friends had with their fathers. But cut to, you know, what is it, 30 years later, my dad and I have a great relationship. It's, one or two notes, but it's still that, how you doing? Things good? All right. Remember to keep your eye on the ball. It's cool.
so did you get into trouble as a kid? Did you kind of
No.
okay?
I was an angel. Um, there's this one photo of my mom chewing me out. I have no idea what I did, but I walked the straight and narrow. I followed the rules. Um, you know, Junior high school, when beer started showing up and cigarettes started showing up, I wanted nothing to do with it, and just had an instinct not to go that way. Curiosity, of course, um, ended up killing that cat junior in high school, but the next day was, proof positive that's not what I wanted to be. So, yeah, I mean, until I was 30, I walked it pretty straight and narrow.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So even through, did you go to college or did
Yeah.
you?
So
Okay.
after high school, I went to Loyola Marymount University Film School. I wanted to go to USC Film School, right? I wanted to go to NYU. I got into USC the undergrad, but not to the film school, which I took as a big slight. I cut up my USC hat and, tossed it. NYU was an option, but my dad didn't want me going that far away for school. And then LMU had a great program. It was local, close to the beach, and I ended up going there because you start in hands-on film production your first day there, basically. And that was a great experience.
Well, what got you passionate about making films? I mean, when did that start?
So I wanted to be a pilot, thanks to Top Gun. For years when I was a kid, and when I was about 15, had an eye test and discovered I didn't have 20/20 vision, and heard that, yeah, pilots have to have 20/20 vision. If you don't, forget about it. So all the Air Force posters came down. The Neil Peart posters. He's the drummer for Rush. Went up, and then I started getting into movies. And the I want to be Steven Spielberg bug was, boom, it caught me big. And so I started playing with the video cameras. The high school had a TV studio, and when I was in junior high school, after school, my mom worked at the high school, so I kind of had an in there. I would ride my bike over and spend hours and hours in the TV studio learning, switching multicam, editing linear on VHS tape. And then when I got into high school, it was just like full bore, boom, football videos, graduation videos. I was selling tapes, that I edited together of these things. And so I was in Ron Mencer Productions when I was 16, 17. It was
No
great.
way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then
That's
that
super
just,
cool.
there was a guy 2 years ahead of me named Jaron Prezon. He's done really well for himself. He was second unit DP on one of the Star Wars movies, and brilliant, brilliant, talented guy. And he was 2 years ahead of me, and I felt like I was following in his footsteps until he went to USC, and then I got denied. And then of course it was like, ugh. But the passion for production and entertainment, I was known as the video guy, the TV guy, in high school, and that in a lot of ways kept me away from going down the, what they call them, the East Alley kids or the East Park. It was this parking lot on one side of campus where everyone went to smoke. I spent most of my time in the TV studio,
So it kind of kept you out of trouble then,
big
just
time.
doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome.
it gave me a
Yeah.
focus and a passion,
Hmm.
and it was. I'm going to film school. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get out of film school. They're going to hire. I'm going to sell a film. They're going to hire. It was the dream, the naive dream, and then of course, the industry slaps you in the face.
How so?
So there were two prominent producers in San Marino that kind of took me under their wing. One produced Raiders of the Lost Ark, Return of the Jedi, and the other one was a prominent production executive. Very, very amazing guys. And they brought me on. So senior year in college, you're supposed to do a thesis film. But at that point, I had said, I don't like writing narrative or scripted, and I don't want to be a director because I was looking around at everybody in class around me, and I was not like them. I felt a different pull. So a few of us went to the dean and said, "Hey, we don't want to spend 30 grand or go into debt to make this film. We want to do other things. Like development sounded great, producing sounded great, and I wanted to explore that." Another gal that was in the group wanted to be a Steadicam operator because her dad was. Another kid wanted to, be an agent. So they restructured the thesis program for six of us to go out and get jobs in the industry, and then spend 6 months in that capacity, and then write our thesis papers on that instead of doing a film. So I work with these guys in development, and they let me at it. I was reading scripts that they were considering. I was in meetings. I was, putting on my nice suit, and I was pitching at Warner Brothers, at 18, 19 years old. And it was a thrill, and they encouraged it, and they taught me a lot. Um, but I think the biggest aversion I had was I'd read great material, but there wouldn't be an actor attached or money attached or they call it packaging, right? So out of 50 scripts, there's three that are incredibly well written. You can see the movie, but they say, "Oh, where's the package? What else is comes with it? Nothing. All right, toss it." So I was seeing all this brilliant material get tossed aside for material that was, subpar, but they had packaged it with an agency. It came with, a roster of actors that were known names, and I won't mention the movies, excuse me, by name, but two they
I
were
mean, you could.
they were pretty bad. One of them, interestingly enough, was a Christian themed film. It was called. Uh, I'm gonna have to. Toby Mac did the soundtrack for it, or sang the
Okay.
song on it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to. I can't. I don't know why I can't remember the name. But yeah, it was a Christian themed film, Christian director, and I believe it was one of the big car battery companies had. they were, very Christian, so they were funding the production company that, the guys I was working with partnered with to make this, big slate of films. And that turned into a big mess because the financing, and they were raising money from grandpas and grandpas all over the country under the auspices of, oh, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Return of the Jedi, and it turned out to be a little bit of a Ponzi scheme. So
Yeah. So I'm curious, the because I feel like there's different worlds in Hollywood. You got the movies side, and then you have the TV side, and then it became a whole new like reality side, which reality
yeah,
television, which seems like you're kind of in that
right.
timeline, right? When it started getting really popular. Like, okay.
Yeah. So the steps to where I am today, I started in development with these guys. Decided I didn't like that because it was soul sucking. It was, this is not what I expected. I expected to, highlight this. This is a great script. You got to make this movie, and a month later we'd be, signing the deals. That didn't happen. So I started looking around, and this is when digital cinema was starting to become a thing. Sony was making the digital cameras. 24p was becoming a frame rate in video. It was exciting, and I found a job at this company called Moviola. And Moviolas are, well, upright editing systems, physically cutting and splicing film, but they were moving into digital storage for the nonlinear systems and cameras. And they were launching a camera department. So took the job. It was kind of a sales business development job, but it allowed me to interact with filmmakers who were like desperate and excited to understand how they could, make their movie for 20 grand and not waste, I mean, that wouldn't even cover the cost of film on a typical feature. So having them come in and out and seeing the passion, that was a great experience. But I had one client that was a creative agency, and creative agency, not like we know it today, it was more like a creative shop. We had editors, or they had editors, designers, a composer in house, new media folks. It was, 50 people under one roof, just doing amazing creative stuff. So like branding for television shows, main titles, show packaging, um, network upfronts, network rebrands. It was all, short form but exciting. They were a client, and they ended up hiring me away from Moviola. And I was in business development there until that kind of just didn't appeal to me because it wasn't the creative side. And so I went to the owner of the company, who was, a great mentor, and said, "Look, I want to be day to day in in the trenches with the creative and with the process. I want to be a producer." So he gave me a shot, and I started out as associate producer, moved up to supervising producer, and it was a great few years. You know,
What were you guys shooting, or what were you guys
so
creating at that point?
we were we were doing everything from the main titles for the West Wing to rebranding Discovery bottom up. Um, there was a lot of access, to studio lots and to where all the, the magic was happening, because we were, going on set to shoot the main title sequences and the background packages, and, all the little things that, people don't really notice. We were doing, and it was just end to end exciting.
Can you explain that really quick? What that is for people that
So
don't know? Like,
consider what an advertising agency does for, a company that makes widgets. This type of creative agency does that for television shows, studios, networks, and they're called promos, they're called upfronts, but they're basically like branding, but for the creative properties.
okay, so is it similar to the trailers that you'd see for a
Yeah.
movie? Okay.
So there were trailer houses. We dabbled in a few trailers, but we had, some amazing editors that were really nimble, and trailers were a really niche, kind of exclusive market. And we were able to do everything from production to, live action production to animation to, the in-house composer was something very unique that attracted clients to us. So we were an agency servicing all the people that I was, just blown away and starstruck by, sitting in meetings with, the showrunners that, like Greg Berlanti, who, I don't know how many shows he's done, but he's been one of the most successful. I think This Is Us, that was the show. Um, but yeah, it was an exciting time. But then the owner of the company decided, he'd kind of had enough. He was getting older, and feeling the pull, and so I got a little entrepreneurial. I got a little tickle, and so we went through 2 rounds with some outside groups of potential investors, to acquire the company, and I would, assume the mantle of president, and for bringing in the money. He would sell the company, and we continue on our glorious path. Both deals were, I'd say, torpedoed by his lack of interest in staying with the company. An earn out. You keep the captain of the ship for a few years before. So there was another producer there, a gal, who, we were doing the same thing. She was more on the network side. I was more handling, the show and the specific project side. And so we decided to partner up and take the clients we had personal relationships with, and we started our own creative agency. It was called New Context Creative, still around today. And I was there for a year and a half, got everything built, financial system set up, um, basically produced the company into existence. And she had the great relationships with the clients. And then the relationship soured. Her fiance, they broke up, and there was just some weird dynamics. A male and a female business partner. There's a lot of pitfalls, and we encountered them all. So I ended up selling my half of the company to her, for a decent amount, which set me up for a couple of years. And this is the interesting transition. I was in a band at the time, so I decided I'm going to be a musician. I'm a drummer, so I decided to pursue that full time with these guys, who coincidentally, both two of them worked for the company. One was my former business partner's brother. He was a guitarist. The singer was an intern we had hired that was just a genius, and the audio mixer we would outsource to was our bassist. So it was kind of an incestuous little thing. Mommy and daddy got divorced, but yeah, that's when I was about 30, and that's when things got really spicy. You know, when you're playing in a band, you feel like you have to emulate bands, and Chili Peppers was a big influence. Parliament was a big influence, and I did some things, that I regret now. But in the moment, you're having fun, and it just feels like the right thing to do. Took up smoking, drinking heavily.
But you also weren't a believer.
Yeah,
So
I had
you
no
had no context or frame of reference in terms of morality, in terms of,
right.
what walk you should be on.
The only, in a previous band, coming out of college, I did have a touch point with church. The lead singer and the guitarist both were recently saved. I didn't understand what that meant, but they said, you got to come to church with us. And so it was Malibu Vineyard Church. And I showed up, and it was like Hollywood in church. Judge Reinhold, I think. But I enjoyed the message, but I didn't understand what I was doing there, and I went 2 or 3 times, and it just, I liked it, but I didn't feel comfortable there. I didn't feel like I belonged. And so I stopped going. And, a couple years later, that church went down in flames. There was some serious controversy there. So my first soiree with Christianity was, not so appealing.
Yeah. So when you were in this time of life where you're kind of partying, rock and roll,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. I mean, was there any type of internal struggle? Was there any type of like unease that you felt, or were you just pretty much embracing this? Like, yeah, this is awesome. Like, this is what life's about.
Yes, I was fully embracing it. I was spending a lot of time at the studio, benders for 4 days with the bassist, just in the studio jamming away. The fact that I had the funds from the business sale, that's, I was investing it, and that's what was keeping me going. And things felt right. But then the market crashed, 2008, the housing market, crash, and I was wiped out. And all of a sudden, I found myself, without a job, without income. The band was starting to get really, really edgy, and I had to, to survive, I had to throw a flag up, and I called a friend, my friend's wife, and she's a line producer. She was a line producer on um, one of those house shows, the VH1 Rock of Love. It was called Daisy of Love. And I said, I'll take anything. I'll be a production assistant. I just need a job. I don't know what to do. And she said, I got a field coordinator position open too. And I said, great, I'll take it. I had no idea what that meant in reality TV and that structure. I had worked in, call it micro TV in the short form. So now transitioning to the long form, I knew the lingo. I knew what to do, but it was, I had to learn trial by fire. But then I just kept getting hired and promoted and hired and promoted in reality, which was booming. And then later, the latter part of my career transitioned into docuseries, which are, not reality because you have the documentary standard. And that's when I really, I'm not I'm not proud of some of the shows I worked on. Kardashians for one. Undercover Boss, very proud of. That was an amazing show and it was real. We didn't fake anything on that show. But the Kardashians glam budget, like the GDP of some small countries. It was sickening. But people were like, "Oh, you're working on the Kardashians, cool." Or, sometimes they see me in the background, and I get calls from random people. Hey. So there was some thrill to it, but it wasn't satisfying until I became the line producer, and then things clicked, and that from 2015 all the way up till last October, I was just killing it in that position. TV producers in the logistics and the problem solving arena, I would put them up against any team of experts. If challenged with, hey, we've got a freight train going this way, we need to turn it 90 degrees and get it going that way. The stuff you see in TV is unreal, and in reality and unscripted, your days are not planned. You have to pivot moments notice. You got private planes in the air flying to the wrong country, with talent on them. You got crews stuck in customs. I mean, everything from that to just, was in South Africa, being held at gunpoint on a dock, but all problems we had to solve. So I started realizing this skill set that I had with the right team, the right production team, which would be like a production manager, coordinator, and an assortment of people that were the production team. And a good team, when you're vibing, nothing can stop you. And it was a thrill. And so,
Let's hold that
yeah,
thought real quick. So we were talking about reality of just working on set in a reality show is
yeah,
intense.
yeah.
Um, so let's try to transition. Let's try to transition into when you found faith, and then what were kind of the internal or external struggles as you started, because you had your first dabble into it with your bandmates for a
Yep.
few days and then
Hmm.
that was it.
Yep.
Then you kind of quit the band, went into reality television.
Hmm.
Talk to me about when that did you meet your wife first or after? Kind of let's go into that part of the story.
So I met my wife in December of 2006, which was 6 months before I sold my half of the company and decided to pursue music full time. She lived in Nevada at the time. Met her at Universal City Walk. She came up the escalator with her two friends. Our eyes met, and it was a God thing. It was a God moment when I look back because, I mean, that timing to be outside. I was having a cigarette. She gave me a little hard time for it. But yeah, from that moment on, like it was a God thing. Looking back, but I think having her in my life made my business partner, a little jealous, and there was tension there. And ultimately exiting the company was the right thing to do to keep the peace, because I really loved Vanessa. She was just like, I definitely out of my league, right? And I was just loving it. So I was able to travel up to Nevada a lot. She was able to travel down. We were able to spend a lot of time together. From 2006 to 2012, about 6 years of partying, having fun, getting to know each other, but dating in a super rocky relationship. The distance was a problem, but then she moved down to LA. And then the closeness was like, whoa. And we both we both have things we regret, certainly, but we made it through it, and we were on that path. So 2012, she says, and she grew up Catholic and then went very prodigal. And she says, if you want to marry me, you have to start going to church. And she had started going to Oasis Church in LA. It was in an old movie theater, very contemporary. And there were 3 or 4 Sundays where she took off. And then, yeah, it was the moment of truth. She said, look, if we're gonna get married, you need to come with me.
So this was in 2012, after
2012.
about 6 years of
Yeah.
dating, and
six
yeah.
years of 6 years of dating and falling in and out of love, but never out of love. It was just it was we were kids again. I was reliving my 20s. She's 8 years younger than I am, so it was like an opportunity for me to like do everything that I didn't do when I was on the straight and narrow, right? Um, but I went, and it was, entirely different from the first experience. I was listening. The worship music was, it was enchanting. And then the guy would get on stage, pastor, and he would give you a life lesson. And I started going, wait a second, this is making sense to me. I don't understand the Bible part of it, but live a good life, treat others with respect. God's there, and so I didn't have an, aha moment, or, wake up in the gutter with needle in my arm and the next day get saved. This was a process, over 2 years, where we got engaged and then kind of disengaged, but then engaged again, set a date for the wedding. And that 2 year process to the day we got married was my conversion to Christianity, and, you know, being saved over that extended period. And the day we got married, we, said our vows to each other, and it felt, like God was there, and it felt right. And we've been going to church ever since.
So was there did you accept Christ like at church or with her together, or how did the kind of your day of conversion, so to speak, when you finally accepted Jesus into your heart?
I
What
can't pinpoint the day, but it was, 4 to 6 months after we started going. We were, you know, not quite engaged yet, but we joined a marriage group. A lot of older couples, and we were in there kind of like, we're not married, but we really need to, kind of, and it was just an amazing group of people. And, we got perspective on marriage and how to handle conflict, and, that conflict is inevitable in marriage, and, tools to deal with that, which, we're still learning. But I would raise my hand, at the altar call, and, they'd hand you the books and stuff like that. So I did that a few times, just reaffirming, yeah. And cut to 2018, we both were baptized together, publicly at Oasis Church. And, that was after 4 years of marriage. And, Carter, our first son, was born, our only son. Um, but once we were married, it got real. And I could feel God's presence. I didn't know how to talk to him. I didn't know how to ask him for things. Praying was, I wasn't always like, the loudest guy in the room. I was kind of more shy and reserved, but praying was like very difficult for me, in a form of people. But it got easier as time went on. And, I started reading the Bible on my phone, and just soaking in these lessons and these messages. The church moved to a much bigger location. It was an old Korean church, but it was, beautiful facility. And, we just engaged in everything. I served on the security team. She was in the kids section. And, we just developed some relationships there that we hadn't experienced in our previous life. These authentic, God filled, God guided relationships, which were, mind blowing for me, because believers, the more authentic they are, the more you're attracted to them. You know, the what do you call it? The lukewarm believers, you could tell who was who, and we were aligning ourselves with the true believers, and it was a, a conversion over years. But I think the first time or second time I went with her, I was like, I got this. I think this is the right thing, and I'm glad she asked me to go.
That's great. Um, so okay, so you're married. Let's first talk about uh, now that you're a Christian. Does that change anything with your work, being in Hollywood, being in the production side? Now that you are following Christ and trying to walk the road that He wants you to walk on, but now it's like, does it look differently at work, and
Yes.
the people that you're interacting with, the things that you're shooting? Tell,
Hmm.
tell me about that.
So that was a very difficult time because, by day, TV producer working with, what is undeniably one of the most liberal and, anti-Christian environments. But I was faking it. I was fitting in, doing the thing, trying to keep a low profile, not trying to engage people in discussion about it, because, you'd hear things, and I'd rerun in my mind all the things I had heard, from, 2000, 1999 when I started. I'm like, okay, wait, these people are not my people. They believe in crazy things. They have these crazy lifestyles, and they justify them with, all kinds of uh, wacky theories. But wait, they're not Christian, but I am. Okay, so how do I play this? How do I bring it out? And it wasn't until I think 2015, 2016, I got this crucifix, and for a long time I wore it like this because I had noticed we were on a show in Texas, and some of the crew, we had a lot of, folks that were gay and lesbian and, alternative lifestyles. But I noticed when I would wear it out, they would act different, and it was palpable. Um, but I also had some great experiences with, was an audio mixer who, he's a veteran, salt of the earth, solid Christian, went to church every Sunday, no matter where we were. And I had him a ton. So whenever we were in a different state or a different city, he's like, I'm going to church this Sunday. And I, sneak out with him and go join him. But the folks that respected it and understood it gave me the respect and the kindness. The folks that were turned off by it just, muted themselves around me. So it was, it was a couple of years of discomfort, and then I just, what, I'm just going to be open about it. I'm going to talk about it. We go to church, we're Christian. Doesn't mean I can't get along with you. You have a alternative lifestyle. You're sinning, but what's that? You love the sinner, hate the sin. That became a big part of adapting and surviving in the entertainment business. Um, but I will say, in the last 5, 6 years, it got harder. As pre-COVID, it was starting to get nasty, but COVID really, started when people were remote and in feeling trapped. You're on Zoom meetings, Google Meets, and you're just seeing faces on the screen, and there's just pent up anger. And so you'd hear things, little quips, little laughs that were completely inappropriate, Um, just recently, I mean, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the Google meeting after that, the next morning, had 35 people on the screen, and there were people giggling. There were people saying, "Oh, they got him. Oh, too bad." And there was one Christian gal who I had hired through somebody I knew. It was a cousin of somebody at church, and I could tell, she was looking at me, and she could tell I was looking at her on the screen with all these faces going, "Oh my gosh," And I'd warned her, but it really just kind of sealed the coffin on that for me. I'm not these people. I can't absorb this energy every day and bring it home. I was working remotely. The office in my house, it's a great office. The door's shut, but my kids are running by, and I'm sitting in here talking to these people who are complete lunatics. I love them. They're creatively, creative geniuses. They all have something I said redeemable about them, but their basic belief structure had no corresponding fit with mine. So I, kind of toughed it out the last 6 months, and when it ended, um, I'll preface that with between gigs, between shows, I would stress out. Even if I knew I was starting a show in 3 weeks, the lack of a paycheck would freak me out. I would stress, I would get anxious. Vanessa can attest to this. I was a nightmare to be around. October 3rd of 2025 last year, I wrapped on, it was a show called Starting Five on Netflix, big NBA show, one of the biggest budgets I've ever handled. And that was the day I said, I'm done. I'm going to take a week off. I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm just going to enjoy things. A couple days later, in the middle of the night, I tripped over Vanessa's Pilates machine, pinched my sciatic nerve. So then it was 2 months of just agonizing pain, just dealing with that. But I had this ridiculously perceptible sense of calm. And the only thing I could attribute it to was God saying, "You're going to be fine." Because I wasn't putting, the industry is collapsing right now. It's changing, the YouTube, um, the influencer thing, television as we knew it, is completely splitting apart. So I wasn't optimistic that I'd finish and the phone would be ringing off the hook. Kind of had an inkling, because I was on that show for 2 years, that in the background things are getting really bad. People that were never unemployed are calling me going, "Hey, do you got anything?" And it's like, whoa, how are you out of work? And so I kind of had mentally prepared myself for it. Not sure what was next. I've always, you know, in the interims, I took a couple longer breaks. I wanted to start a Christian, film studio, and would, align myself with a pastor and say, "Hey, let's start it as a nonprofit." Just these wild ideas, and we can make Christian films better, and we can, that hallmarky Christian stereotype. We can get gritty. We can rebuild the image of man on screen. Opening a shot, guys in a gutter with the needles in his arm. And he has this full redemption arc. People need to see that. And most of the Christian films don't do that. Angel Studios has done great with the films they've put out that are not G rated, and there's been a lot more of that. But my passion for it just kind of fizzled. And even after rapping last year, there was this opportunity, and with another pastor, to partner up and go for it, and it just didn't feel right, didn't stick with me. I wasn't thinking about it every day. I was thinking about, okay, how do I reinvent myself? How do I turn everything I've learned, all these skills I've had, or all these skills I've been employing, working with teams, solving problems, how do you package that for, a typical, industry or a typical company? And it's actually quite hard, because your gaps in employment, 62 employers over 30 years. They kind of they don't understand it. So the AI job application process, nightmare, but I was shooting out resumes and doing a little bit of networking, but I've had these ideas, on my heart for a couple of years to start my own businesses. And that prevailing sense of calm enabled me to, focus on it. AI has been fantastic in terms of research and validating things. And, I feel like if I didn't have that, I'd be working with consultants and spending a lot of money on, people just to, help with the branding. And so I've been able to do a lot myself. And I'm at the point now where I'm ready to, go to market with both of these concepts. And I'm just looking for a partner, not an investor. I don't want a VC. I don't want somebody, that's just all spreadsheet. I want someone who believes in me as an operator, and what I can do, and aligns themselves with me instead of just here's some money, go. I want I want somebody that will be a part of it and be
That's
energetic.
exciting.
Yeah.
Excuse me. That's exciting, man. Um, let's take a quick break
Yep.
and then we'll get back into that. All right, let's pivot a little bit. So you're no longer producing television, you're no longer doing any of that stuff. You're now at home more,
Mm-hmm.
married, two
Yep.
two kids.
Yeah. So I got a son, Carter, daughter Charlotte, 9 and 8. He's about to be 10. They're in it right now. Um, but I really have to, one of the interesting things in this last 4 or 5 months, I got my first Bible, my first paper Bible. I've been doing it on the phone, the 365 thing, but holding a Bible that contains, the entirety of the Word of God in it, there's something crazy about that. Um, and so, I take this with me pretty much everywhere. And, I started reading Genesis and gotten in a few pages. It gets confusing but I'm dabbling around during church services, when they bring up scripture. I mean, I'm digging in. So this is the first time since 2012 that I have my own paper Bible. But I have to say, I am so blessed with Vanessa as my wife because she is spiritually on fire. She's involved in so many women's Bible studies and Novo prayer cohorts. She's leading one, she's participating in one. She is on fire for Jesus, and it is inspiring. Which, looking back a few years, we had a conversation about being unequally yoked and what that meant. And that was kind of, you know, a prelude to, I think what we're going to talk about being the leader of, the spiritual leader of the household, which is, there's some irony because she led me to the Lord by, if you want to marry me, you got to go to church. I came to the Lord through that process. We both served, but when I was working, she was, our kids are homeschooled, so a lot of time with the kids, and a lot of time to serve and be part of, these Bible studies and these, all these efforts. And she's a marvel to me how much she's changed and grown. And I'm so blessed. God definitely put her in my life to get me on the right track and put me here, blessed with two beautiful children. So yeah, it's her all the way. But being the spiritual leader of the household, and I'll refer to your first guest, Andrew Olson, who I look up to greatly. I think he is such a stud in every way. And with Homefront, he's actively writing curriculum for stuff that he's actively going through, that we're all going through. And to be able to do that, come in and share it and discuss it and go home feeling more empowered and understanding what spiritual leadership is, you know, just little things like doing the devotional nightly with the kids. Last night we had a late night, and I know it's going to be up early this morning, so she handled it because I was already in bed. But it's been a very consistent thing. Then we do the Lord's Prayer, and then they go to sleep, or she'll read them a book. But we bless our meals. We're Vanessa and I are working on intentional time together. We did this Legacy Makers thing, And so every Tuesday we've been meeting to kind of do an assessment and, figure out how to, align ourselves in the household spiritually with the kids, and, how to, make them disciples. And, it's a lot, but we've noticed that these regular Tuesday, meeting times have been calm. They've been productive, and warmth has. I don't want to say warmth didn't leave, but there was a long period where I think we were both kind of off kilter. And recently, last couple months, we've kind of gotten past that, and we're more in alignment. She's definitely way more involved biblically and in specific studies and efforts than I am, but I'm learning that I don't have to be the one pulling the wagon. I can be the one, if I picture it like a parade, she's up on a beautiful chair, the kids are running around on the side, and I'm pushing the float. It's not that I have to be the man mandates how every day is going to go. We're collaborating together, and she's enabling me to get more confident, as I dive deeper, participate in home front, other men's studies, talk to men on that real level, exchanging anecdotes that we all can recognize. I mean, from the home front meetings, any topic brought up, everybody goes, "Oh man, yeah, that's me." They've got some variation, little different coloration here and there, but we all deal with the same stuff basically. And that's been really humbling and really encouraging, because now I feel like, okay, there's a path set out for me, to be the spiritual leader. What that looks like, in time, God will reveal it. But if I stay consistent with the kids and stay consistent with, improving our marriage daily, and the intentional marriage, it's curriculum all over the place, the intentional Christian marriage, making sure that that is something that you pay attention to and you activate. Date nights, those are hard. The kids activities give us very little time, but a little sliver on Friday nights, when they're at play practice. But we're slowly but surely getting into that groove of, okay, kids do this, we are us, we're separate from them. Our relationship comes first, and then that the fruits of that relationship, then the kids will see in front of them, and hopefully set them up for a successful walk.
So I guess you bring kind of a unique perspective because you were in the Hollywood scene, you were in the film producing side of things. What are your thoughts on children's programming? Children's kind of, can you speak to that? I mean, do you
Yeah.
have much knowledge about that? And like, what are you doing to protect your kids, whether it comes from the video game side to the shows?
Mhm.
I mean, I see now where it's like you got, I mean, you see it on social media, you got all the Netflix agenda, which is just
Yeah.
LGBTQ, try to just push that as normalizing as possible to the kids.
Hmm.
Is that being pushed by the highest up, or is this for the writers, or what do you?
Across the board.
Okay.
Across the board. And you said agenda. So, 50 years ago, television was different. We were a more homogenized country. People didn't have as drastic differences as they do now, socially and sexually. It wasn't mainstream, so there wasn't really an obvious agenda. TV's always had an agenda. It's keep you engaged. The advertisement comes on, you buy the product. It's a tool to create revenue. But this country, is clearly bifurcated, and the folks in Hollywood that have that particular bent, their agenda is now way more obvious and way more dangerous, because it's seeping through, to kids' YouTube, to Nickelodeon. It's very, very dangerous. Video games, the iPhone, or phones in general. Um, Screen time, we don't do screen time with the kids. We'll watch movies once in a while, but they're not on. They don't play video games. They're not on the phones, and if we can if we can keep them off phones until they're 21, I think that'll be a big win. But we'll see. But yeah, the way this country has split, I want to say along political lines, but ideological lines, that it's okay to be gay, that it's okay to be this, we can celebrate this, and you know, um, uh, heteronormative, that's a term now. Transgender, I mean, it used to be transvestite, and it used to be kind of a comical thing, a man dressing up as a woman, and it was kind of parody and kind of funny. But now the identity is being questioned, and the very core of what makes us male and female is being shattered by the folks that want to justify it by inserting it into media and making it all day, all the time, every channel they can possibly infiltrate. So protecting the kids from that is priority number one, and Vanessa's very on top of it. And it's hard because I'm such a media guy. I love watching movies. So there was a stretch with the sciatica. um everybody go to bed, and I'd stay up and I'd watch 2 3 movies, just binge them, just catching up on stuff that I hadn't seen in the last 10 years. But that was kind of putting a divide. Oh, you're up well after we go to sleep, what's going on? It just creates tension. So stop doing that. And the urge to, hey, Cart, come over here, you check out this baseball video, because he just started Little League. He was with Coach Ballgame and Sandlot, which is, I'd call, a much more aligned baseball camp. They learn fundamentals. It's like Sandlot. It's just pickup games. He's in his first formal season of Little League. And it's like, okay, now, okay, this is the worldly part of our lives. The Little League parent syndrome. Wow. I've been, shocked by it. So, but their exposure to it is limited to that, and protecting them there is easier because we're blessed with a great coach. He's an amazing guy, and he's got a great team. His neighbors on the team. So, keeping the guardrails in place. There's times when they stray a little bit. They're over at the neighbor's house, and they're watching them play video games, and they're watching them watch YouTube, and they're close to the access to it, and it's unnerving. You can't wrap them in a plastic bubble, though. They're gonna see it. um
So what are you doing proactively? I mean, are you keeping the lines of communication open with them in terms of, hey, I understand you're going to be at a friend's and they might watch YouTube, or you're going to be at a friend's and they're going to play video games.
yeah.
Are they allowed to play video games at their friend's house? Or is this something where you're just saying,
So
like,
yeah, so the message to them is, these are the boundaries that our family has. And when you're over at the neighbor's house, those boundaries still exist. You don't go over across the street and all of a sudden you get to, play video games and watch movies and stuff like that. You need to be responsible enough to say, I'm not allowed to do this, or my parents don't let me do this. Is there something else we can do? And with repetition, it's starting to sink in with them, and they understand the danger. I don't, not the complete articulation of it, but they understand that that's an evil thing. That if you spend all day playing video games, it's a total waste of time. So fortunately, homeschool, they're outdoors all day. They're at the beach today, doing schooling. The non-traditional schedule. They get great time with Vanessa at in it used to be our dining room. Now it's the classroom. And going remote in 2020 and being around them more, like, I feel like the, I'm accessible, and that we both have. I would say, I think she would say she's got better control over their access, but I'm trying to respect it as much as I can, and like forget that I love movies and TV, and want it on all the time. So we're we're working through it.
Hmm.
It's tough because it's everywhere all the time. The 6-7 thing. You know, I mean, little research on that. It's Santeria. It's demonic. Skrilla, whoever the artist is, openly admits it. But these kids are doing it at games. The neighbors are doing it. It's like, so I'm an assistant coach on the team, and I said it is not allowed here. It does not exist. It's not funny anymore. And the kids are kind of funny about it. They go, "Yeah, 6-7. We don't like it anymore." But just these brain worms that the media is able to insert even in kids that are protected from screens is astonishing. So I don't see the mainstream media industry, which is collapsing, going through a lot of transition, backing off the agenda, because the louder they can be, the more normalization they put in front of our kids. You know, that's a win for them. And anybody that protests it is a maniac, right?
Right. So now that you're home, you're pursuing new ventures.
Mhm.
You're getting to spend more time with your wife, more time with your kids.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's you're a stay-at-home dad in terms of working from home, or you're hybrid, or you're as busy as you were
Mhm.
producing where you're gone all the time, you can kind of speak to both worlds in that sense now, where you've kind of done the full range of like being gone all the time
Yeah.
to hybrid to
Mhm.
now also, now you're at home.
Yep.
Um, what would you speak to guys, just what would you say to men, whether it's them gone all the time or they're home all the time? What would you say to them in terms of encouragement or, uh, wisdom or advice that you could pass on to guys,
Yeah.
that are kind of juggling and trying to figure out how to be a good dad, whether you're gone all the time or whether you're at home all the time working?
Yeah.
How can you be a good dad, good husband?
Be present. And that's something Vanessa reminds me of all the time. You have to be present with them. They have to know they have your attention. And when I started working at home before we moved, I was in the kitchen, at the kitchen table. And when we moved down here, there was an office, and it's perfect because the door's closed. But I'd get feedback from Vanessa saying, "Hey, when you're in there, you're gone. You're immersed in work, and we don't feel like you're home until 6 p.m. and it's time for dinner." And that was tough to hear, because I felt like when they could run into the office and say hi, or joke around, I felt like, okay, this is something I'm blessed with. But seeing it from their perspective, oh, daddy's on a meeting, we can't go in there. You have to create accessibility. You have to create that intentional time. I struggle with it still. I don't have a boss right now. I don't have a set schedule. And you know, thank God for Little League, because that's intentional time for Carter and I. My daughter and I, daughters are tough. They're tough, but we have our moments, and we have our, those times where I just feel like, the love of a daughter is just, we watched Despicable Me 4, which is cool. There's not much of an agenda in there. And she was laying on my arm, and I was just like, oh, there's nothing better than this, just that closeness. They know I love them, but my advice would be, pour as much love into your kids as you can, as time permits, and make sure they know, if you're gone, if you're traveling, that you're still thinking about them. Call in at night and do the devotional. Stay connected. You know, don't be gone. Be gone, but there, and make sure the kids have that fill. The fill that you fill their hearts, fill their souls with. Just that reminder that we love you. You know.
I love that. I love that. I also think you mentioned how you recognize Vanessa's spiritual maturity and how you've kind of allowed her to lead in places.
Mhm.
And I did like your analogy with the parade where it's like you're almost like, hey, I'm okay with her leading here in these areas, and I'm here to push, and
Yeah.
I'm here to like back her up, and I'm still pushing, and I'm still contributing.
Mhm.
And I think that that is really cool because I think a lot of dads, whether they're traveling all the time or whether they're home, there's this ego involved where it's like, I am in control.
Right.
I'm the one calling the shots. Even if my wife is better in this area,
Yeah.
I'm the man. So I'm gonna take this over and do it. And I think with what you shared today, I think that's important for guys to remember is that, you want to be, like you said, equally yoked.
Yeah.
And you want to recognize that God has given your wife to you as a gift, but also as a partner to
Right.
work together
Yeah.
and raise your kids in the way they should go,
Mhm.
but do it together and recognize there's going to be times where you're going to take a step back. I'm guilty of this all the time. I'm very controlling. I
Mhm.
like to be in control.
Yeah.
And it's taken years for me to kind of let my grip go and let Lonnie lead in places or to do things with the boys that I go, okay, that's awesome. Like
Yeah.
it's really cool to see that. Um, I can do so much better and I'm working on that. But to hear you say that, I think that's super important. I think for guys as they're listening to this to really take that away of like, you got to die to self a little bit,
Mhm.
kill your ego a little bit,
Yeah.
let your wife, if she's doing what's right and what God wants her to do, let her do it.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah, the illustration of that is, like after a home front meeting or after a rah rah men spiritual leader, leader of the household, you don't have to come into the house thumping your chest and barking orders and stuff like that. It's not a power struggle. It's a calm positioning. Uh, you know, Making sure that you're not creating havoc by trying to pull that yoke your way to show that you're in charge, but to balance it out with that intentional time that we all struggle with, and I'm constantly reminded of. But when we do have it, it is very fruitful, and when that connection is there, there's nothing like it, and God is present, and it's just it's incredibly loving. um disciplining kids is our biggest challenge. um I was, like I said before, I was a straight and narrow kid. I wasn't punished. I think I was spanked once. So being in that position of, okay, you're the dad, you've got to handle the discipline. It's been a juggling act, or I was a tightrope walk, and a treacherous one, because as their teacher, she has one role. As their mom, she has another role. She plays a lot of roles. And I'm dad who is, focused on making sure that they have what they need, that they're provided for, that they have a roof over their heads, beds to sleep in, and they've got mommy and daddy to come cuddle with and soak up whatever they need. And I think, you know, been very blessed that she's been able to stay at home. And I know that's a challenge for, a lot of folks. And I hear that recurring a lot. We both work and they're at school, and we get, so little time to execute these, spiritual leader roles. But 5 minutes, in a kid's life where you can get their attention focused on you and you feel like you break through. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes fewer words better. I've learned that in Little League. You can't, you know, give a speech to a bunch of little leaguers and 3 words in, they're already picking daisies. And you got to remember that with your own kids, that whatever you're trying to impart on them has to be distinct, understandable, and on their level. And so it's been interesting, being challenged by Vanessa to be better at that, to actually have conversations, especially with my son, because I'd say he's a little more wild, and his temperament's, a little more challenging. But we get into these conversations about it, and I see, glimmers of hope. I see him start to understand, and he um, backs into his old ways, on occasion. It's just like, oh, did you not hear anything I said? But they're young. Uh, and when I was 10 years old, if my dad came to me to try and have a conversation, it's like after the first 20 minutes, can I go out and play? You know, play is their currency. And, with the discipline we've been doing, you know, to date, taking away that play is punishment. But it doesn't seem to be enough. So, we're kind of volleying that back and forth. And I know that I need to really connect with both of them. That, look, Daddy is in charge of your behavior, or lack thereof, and punishments will be things that hurt. Not necessarily physically, but I'm going to make it a priority to learn what makes each of them tick. She has so much more time with them than I do, and I've got to catch up on that. But meeting meeting them where they're at and getting a few words through that stick, I started to notice improvement in some areas over time. I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. And in 10 years, when they're adults, I trust that God is working through Vanessa and I to raise God fearing kids, and kids that aren't going to go wildly prodigal. I expect there to be some of that, but
Yeah. And remember too, I mean, every kid with discipline reacts differently. Some discipline isn't going to work
yeah,
on certain kids. And so I think it's important for parents to realize, dads especially, because dads are usually the disciplinarian,
yeah,
that certain kids, even boys, I mean, I have 3 boys and they all react differently to different types of punishment.
right,
So that's been a trial in itself, is figuring out what's the most effective way for them to learn from their mistakes by the
hmm,
discipline that I have dealt out to them. Um, so, but yeah, it is important. I think any dad that's uh, kind of ignoring the disciplinarian role and just letting kids do whatever, I think is in for
yeah,
a world of pain
yeah.
later in life.
and
So,
and I didn't know I was ignoring it. I didn't know I was oblivious to it. You know, again, blessed that she's got the nerve and the confidence to let me know. She's half Peruvian, half Mexican. She's spicy, and as she's matured and become this amazing woman, she tells me how it is, and it's like, oh, I'm getting lectured again, or I'm getting the cold shoulder again. But through that process, it's I'm starting to read the kids better, I think, anyway. um, and finding those points of connection where I do have their attention, when it's like the two of them and myself in the car together. We listen to Adventures in Odyssey, which is a fantastic, biblically driven kid series. Focus on the Family, highly recommend it. They love listening to that, and there's a message at the end of each episode. And I make sure that when the story ends and the person comes on to say, "What did you learn today?" That they're paying attention to that part, because that's the meat of it right there. Here was this entertaining story, but this is the message. And if that's getting through, I have a feeling there's going to be kind of a meet in the middle thing, where their spiritual maturity and their maturity overall is going to start aligning better with where I'm at as a disciplinarian.
mhm.
And I would say, just giving giving advice, it's tough. I would just say, align with your wife. She is your other half. God, uh, you know, made woman to be man's companion, and that is a sanctity that you cannot take for granted, you cannot overlook. The stronger you are in front of your kids with your wife, that's something they will see and they will carry on. My parents were divorced. My mom got remarried, blessed by this amazing man. They've been married 30 plus years now, and he's a Christian. And so seeing like two marriages and looking at what, we've got going now, you know, divorce is not an option at all. It's, not even in consideration. So it's power through, work it through. If this doesn't work, try this. If this doesn't work, try this. But alignment with your wife and really dig into what your kids, what their love language is. It's talked about all the time. Oh, my love language is this. Your kids have a love language too, and they're more receptive when you're at that level with them, or they're totally oblivious when you're not. So it's, finding those moments.
I love that. Let's take a quick break before we close. All right, Ron. So in closing, um, tons of great stuff you've shared, man. Really appreciate that. It's been super cool hearing your story. I just want to kind of close and wrap it up with the whole premise behind Men at the Gate. Obviously, you talked about Andrew Olson. He's an inspiration to a lot of men.
Yeah.
Inspired me to start this just by seeing the response from the Homefront group, men kind of sharing their hearts at the group, talking about their trials, their tribulations, talking about their struggles and their past, and so it really inspired me to kind of start this, to get more out of the story from each guy, kind of just to almost therapeutic in a sense of like being able to share your whole, put into words your whole life story and what it's done for you today and what you're
Yeah.
doing today, um, to be a better husband, to be a better father, to be a better Christian. And if you could tell your younger self,
Hmm.
pick a time frame, whether it's during your earlier years, your party years, whatever it might be, um, what's kind of one thing that you would want that Ron to know?
It really would be going back to the 8, 9-year-old Ron and saying, the guy you're talking to at night, he's real. He's really there and he loves you.
I like that.
And you're gonna get to know him better. But just know in your heart that, those conversations you're having conceivably with the ceiling are what life's about. And, just don't smoke, don't drink responsibly, the usual things. But really, I would have loved to have had exposure to church and, the Bible and, a, a Jesus relationship much younger. But, it's cathartic to sit here and tell you the story because I've never done this. So to hear it playing out, I wouldn't really change anything because I've ended up in what I feel is, a very blessed marriage. It comes with its challenges. We have 2 kids and we've got a mission. And I think you had asked a question or referred to standing guard. I think standing guard, what that looks like today, especially in society, um, standing guard is not standing, it's doing. And what you're doing with this podcast is you're doing something. Men can come here and be vulnerable and share, and somebody out there listening is going to identify and, do something in their life to improve, take a step forward, step up, empower themselves to become, that leader that they're meant to be. But passivity, standing guard like the English guards, right? No, you have to be forward leaning. You have to be, in kinetic motion. It has to be very active, especially today because things are flying at us a million miles an hour. It's something new every day. And if you're not, if you're on your heels, you're going to get ransacked.
I love it. Thanks for having thanks for coming on, man. I
It's an honor,
appreciate you.
man. This
Yeah.
is this is so cool, and I wish you the best of luck with this and all your future episodes.
Yeah,
And
I appreciate it.
yeah, man.
Yeah, it's really great to have guys like you on that I think you've just shared a lot of really cool things that men can relate to and glean from, because I think the whole premise behind Men at the Gate was to create something where men, wherever they are in their walk, wherever they are with their families, whether it's a baby, whether their wife's pregnant,
Mhm.
or whether their kids are already grown and gone and they're dealing with grandkids, who knows?
Right.
But to be able to just hear men's stories and to gain some knowledge and wisdom to inspire them to
Yeah.
be a better husband, better father,
Yeah.
and better Christian.
You're
So
doing it, man.
thanks, man. I appreciate
Keep
it.
it up.
Yeah, dude.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, brother.